In the summer of that year, the Pacific War was brought to an end with two cataclysmic explosions. They destroyed everyone and everything for miles around and left a simmering, scorching layer of radiation to last for ages. The lucky ones were those right under the detonations, who were immediately reduced to ashes and outlines etched in concrete. It was those who survived the initial blast who learned the true meaning of suffering. They wandered about aimless, hopeless, with melting flesh groping about in the near total blindness for help. None came, and that which did came too late and with little or no means of alleviating their agony. The torture was not short-lived. For years, even decades to come, those who had been exposed to the radiation suffered numbness, loss of fingernails, blood spots under the skin, tumors, leukemia, kidney and liver dysfunction, and so on. The list of after effects was almost endless, and for those who suffered from them, so was the pain. Such widespread and severe affliction hastened the surrender of the Japanese forces, and with the capitulation of the other Axis powers earlier in the year, the ceasing of worldwide hostilities was now complete. For the general populace, exhausted, depleted, it couldn't have come soon enough, and with the exception of a couple of skirmishes in Guam and a few other remote areas, peacetime was welcomed by victor and loser nations alike with great relief and vigor. But not by all. Not everyone was pleased with either the outcome of the war or the means by which it had been achieved. There were some who believed that the Axis powers still retained the ability, the manpower, and most of all the technological savvy to inflict revolutionary damage on the Allied forces and alter not merely the outcome of the war, but both history and the future together. Suncorp was one such organization, a secretive, privately owned Japanese company based in Okinawa. It was bitterly opposed to the Japanese surrender and continued to work unabated in the technological, ideological, and biological warfare. Though the rest of the country labored in poverty, Suncorp remained flush with funds for its operations. A little-known fact regarding the end of the war in the European theater concerns the demise of the Führer. In the bunker in Berlin, just before he put the pistol into his temple, Hitler uttered his final words, "Gib alles zu Suncorp," give everything to Suncorp. As such, the Okinawan company had available to them near unlimited resources from war loot and retained communication with its sister allies in Germany and Italy to pursue its goals of supremacy. Given these objectives, one could hardly overstate the joy that reverberated along their corridors when they received word from the fatherland that a new resource of immeasurable capacity had been secured. And so it was that Franciscus was removed from Indonesia at a very young age and transported to Okinawa, where he was to spend the remainder of his adolescent years. There his name was shortened to Frank because the Japanese seemed incapable of pronouncing the Ciscus part of his name, and he was put in a lab working toward various means of Axis domination. The enigma of a young man grew to about 180 centimeters tall and developed a well-defined body thanks to chasing monkeys and boars around the lab whenever they escaped, which was often. He would wrestle them to the ground or knock them out sometimes with the aid of a porcelain sink, a trick he had learned from a Slav. He had a shock of thick black hair, which gave him an aura of tremendous virility. He wore silver-rimmed wire glasses upon a nose that had more than once identified him as having Jewish ancestry, an association he vehemently denied. And he always wore the same blue shirt. It had never been washed. Frank's secluded upbringing gave him a peculiar perspective on the world. He tended to see people and events in extremes. He divided folk into creators and consumers, leaders and followers, thinkers and dumbasses, and bullies and their prey. No one really sat in between any of these paradigms. People were either one or the other, and once they were one, it was virtually impossible to change to the other. Frank saw himself as the consummate creator, leader, thinker, bully in almost any environment he found himself in. And then there was his voice. Much has been hypothesized about the raspiness of Frank's voice and why it came to be so. Some have assumed it to be a purely genetic anomaly. Others are certain it is the result of a bacterial infection caught from any number of the animals he was experimenting on. On occasions, Frank told people that it was from swallowing thumbtacks after losing a bet in a drunken stupor. Goodness. But the truth of the matter is that for a short stint in Frank's formative years, he took to singing Christian heavy metal, a phase he quickly grew out of to the relief of everyone in the lab and the local area. But the constant shrieking and growling took its toll on poor Frank's virgin vocal cords, and alas, they never fully recovered. Young Frank had interests and ideals that extended way beyond the walls of the lab. He was fascinated with midgets and aliens and black people in Paris. He found unusual dialects from the Congo, Peru, and the bowels of Southeast Asia to be of particular interest. Rap and opera filled his musical library, and he developed a particular distaste for non-Japanese who attempted to infiltrate Japanese society, professing a knowledge of the culture whilst demonstrating a profound ignorance of it. There were many artisans and thinkers, musicians and poets who inspired him, but none more so than Schrödinger and some guy named Mozart, who down the line would become the ancestor of Fred Durst. Biologically speaking, Frank himself, it turned out, an even more mysterious figure than his filthy origins would suggest. Though dredged up from an Indonesian sewer, DNA testing revealed that he was primarily of Japanese and German extraction. This explains some inherited traits in Frank, like his insatiable appetite for takoyaki, sudden bowing, and a penchant for Ragio Tatsu early in the morning. On the crowd side, Frank would immerse himself in bratwurst diets for weeks on end, find secret relief in listening to recordings of Papa bands of Munich, and was without a sense of humor. Yet there were other genetic markers in his DNA that were unidentifiable, and it was these which started the rumors and fears amongst the colleagues in the lab.